So we will call the meeting to order. And we're going to start with introductions to celebrate Clyde being here. And Terry, let's start with Lynn because you just are getting settled.
Thank you. So Lynne Saxton, Director of the Oregon Health Authority. Thrilled that Clyde's here. Welcome.
Thanks, Lynn.
Colleen Thornlad, Executive Director of Kairos PDX.
Janet Doherty-Smith.
Hi, Clyde. Megan Irwin. Good to see you.
Martha, you want to go next?
I can. This is Martha Brooks on the road in Wyoming in 6 inches of snow.
Oh my gosh.
Bobby Weber, Oregon State University Child and Family Research.
Okay. So I'm Clyde Psyche. I'm the Interim Director of the Department of Human Services for the state of Oregon.
Eva Ripito, AFSCME.
Terry Tollifer, I'm the Director of North Central Public Health District serving Gillum, Sherman, and Wasco counties.
Great. Welcome, and welcome to everybody. We think that we're going to be quite efficient today, although we're not, that's okay. But it looks to us like in preparing for the meeting that we have business that we've already dealt with or being introduced to things we will deal with. So we have 2 action items and the rest information. I'm, as I said, Bobby Weber. Pam is traveling due to her work, so she is not here. Alyssa, will you call the roll, though, for the rest of us?
Martha Brooks.
Here.
Janet Doherty-Smith.
Here.
Colleen Thornlad.
Here.
Eva Ripito.
Here.
Lynne Saxton.
Here.
Terry Tallhofer.
Here.
Clyde Psyche.
Here.
Bobby Weber.
Here.
Megan Irwin.
Here.
Great.
Okay. So I assume the ones you didn't call are people who've told us they could not be here. Correct. Okay. We are going to start with a review of our meeting in Lynn and Benton counties. Lynn, Benton, Lincoln, I guess.
Yep.
I have to, being from Corvallis, I am so used to saying Lynn, Benton, and now have to learn to say Lynn, Benton, Lincoln. Although, for those of you who are not from that part of the state, Lynn, Benton, Lincoln, like our ESD is Lynn, Benton, Lincoln. The CCO is Lynn, Benton, Lincoln. It's not that this is unheard. I mean, it's not that unusual, but so Lynn, Benton, Lincoln. So we'd like to know for anybody who was able to participate, and it could have been electronically, but if you were able to participate at all in our 2 days, and Terry got sick while we were there. It was so sad.
I was sick yeah.
I got vertigo. There was no moving. It was pretty miserable.
Oh, mine was not vertigo. That's weird. I was sick on Wednesday night, too.
Yeah, I know we lost both of you due to illness. So, but Terry was there for the first day, and we had a fascinating 2 days, actually. So, for those who were able to participate in any way, is there anything you'd like to share from the March meeting?
Bobby, this is Martha. I do.
Great.
I thought it went really well, and I really enjoyed the visiting out and around with the community partners. My only sadness for that meeting or for those 2 days is that more people did not participate. And I would like to put out a plea or a call that we try to do that and show up, because I really learn an awful lot about the community when we go and visit. Thank you.
I would say, Terry, go ahead.
The community visits were incredibly impressive. It was just really great to see a community that's come together to serve kids in that way. This is one of those communities that we kind of encourage the marriage different than they had anticipated.
That's right.
I'm going to say that in the most positive way I can. And they spoke to that a little bit and had really embraced it and moved forward and really found it the way to make it a strength. And I thought that was very encouraging, and that they recognized it and acknowledged it and moved forward with it. I thought that was really great.
Maybe we should do a quick review for the people who weren't there. That we met first at Old Mill Center, and there were multiple people from the hub who met with us. And then they took a tour of Old Mill Center and saw its programs. And then I went to an Old Mill board meeting. But then we reconvened at Lebanon Community Hospital, and the partners had brought parents from I think the parents were only from the 2-county area. I don't think any parents came over from Lincoln, but it was an amazing night. Wouldn't we all say? Anyway, I'll just do the blueprint and then we go. The next morning we get up and we go to a CCO meeting, and I won't say more because somebody's going to talk about that. If they don't, I will. But anyway, we went to this amazing meeting between the hub and the CCO. And then we went out to Lynn Benton Community College and had the board meeting and had researchers from the School Readiness Research Consortium share findings on analyses done with the kindergarten assessment scores that had such direct relevance for our work that was anyway, and had the rest of the board meeting, but we didn't have a quorum, so some of the things are back on our agenda. So I think that's just a description of what we did. Megan.
I was going to say the parent dinner was my favorite part. I liked the way that we sat down and ate family style instead of doing like a big kind of presentation, just had the chance to talk to people while we ate, and I learned a lot with it was just one family that I sat with, and I learned a lot about the experience of being a family in Lebanon, which is not a place I had ever been.
Lynn?
I was on the call, but I wasn't on the trip. But I do want to say that I think there is an example in Lynn, Benton, Lincoln. I was in Benton with the CCO. Jeremy Vandehey, the governor's policy advisor, and I were there on our CCO tour probably 2 weeks ago. And one of the examples that we have to look at there in terms of early learning is they did not join those 3 counties together in a CCO because it was just like natural and easy. I mean, they leaned in to creating a regional model to leverage their resources to produce better results, and the practical effect of that, independent of the healthcare outcomes, is that their hub and their CCO are able to leverage the funding and able to integrate the outcomes. And they have, I don't know if they gave you their outcomes book, their kind of.
Oh, I wish I'd brought this beautiful.
But
they handed us.
That's a really important piece in terms of all the systems coming together, identifying some goals, using measurement to achieve the goals, and holding themselves accountable to it. And they were very candid with us about, here's the things we aren't accomplishing, here's the things we are. But it's an important example because in Lincoln County for quite some time, there was never enough critical mass to deliver best practice children's services. And I know that because I worked there trying to do that. And the reason they're able to make the gains they're making in Lincoln County now are because of all the good work of the people in Lincoln County, but also because they have Benton and Lynn County in the mix. And that's something that should not be lost on us, that having the resources, having one county have to carry all the resources is not always possible or economically optimal, and they've done it, and so I just there's a shout out to them, but there's also a model there for us in how to do this work in an integrated way across systems using performance as the driver.
Khalid.
I also was on the call with, I think it was with the CCOs, and I'm looking at my notes from that. And I think one of the things that struck me was similar to what Lynn was saying, that they were able to blend the CCOs in early childhood, that they were able to, for maternity care, I think the maternity care coordinators were able to provide supports to families, and they administered the ASQs. They got families in prenatal classes, and then those prenatal classes. So all this, it was the blending and the melding together of the two systems. And I thought first about just locally in Multnomah County and how, gosh, that's that seems like a really not impossible task to do. And so how do we bring those partners together to do that? And it's so preventative, and it gets, young children off on the right start already, and being able to track where they are. So yeah, I really enjoyed being on the call, and I wish I was there in person because I probably would have asked more questions. But it was really impressive to me what they were doing. So.
Julie Manning from the CCO. So now, I think she chairs the Hub Governance Board.
Really?
Also, anyway, her words I'll never forget. It was something I should get her to say them exactly. But this partnership that they have created between the Hub and the CCO is when the mom gets her pregnancy test, we wrap our arms around her and we stay with her.
That's great.
Wouldn't that? I mean, I don't. That's probably not a verbatim quote, but there's no confusion about the message. And so they've got a parenting hub, and it's the maternal child health and the parenting educators are integrating in a way that it's what the vision is that the parents are just going to experience support, and that it stays with them. They don't end when the baby's born. It's going to continue on as the family moves forward. I was about jumping out of my seat. I was so excited because this collective efficacy, it was like, okay, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
In real life with real people, here it is.
It's not just theoretical.
Here, it's not theoretical.
Yeah.
Here it is. Different systems working in an integrated way so that the experience of people at a time of high need is recognized and strategies put in place. I was just so excited about that. Anyway, Janet, what do you have anything more to add down there?
No, it's just a reminder that in smaller communities, it seems that people, I have this bad analogy that I heard years ago, that if it would be better to have a heart attack in a small room than in a gymnasium, because everybody in a bigger area thinks someone else will take care of you. But in a smaller area, we feel more responsible to take action. And I feel like that is evident in when we go to the counties that are more rural or smaller. Everyone takes it as their responsibility. And I felt like you did. People showed up at the committee meetings and from very different parts of the community at our meetings. It was impressive. And I also always heard all my work life of the old mill school. And I think that might have been the first time I was at the old mill school. So that was it. It's interesting how many evolutions it's gone through, and it's still doing good things.
I just have
Eva.
I have a question about, because I don't remember if we talked about transportation during the meeting, but I know a few years back when I was talking with our Head Start members in Lincoln County through Community Services Consortium, they were concerned because they had been cutting transportation, and this meant for a lot of parents, they weren't then able to access the wraparound services that are needed. And, as a result, parents were having a hard time getting children to dental exams that were much needed. And, so I and I know that when we were discussing preschool promise, that a lot of communities said transportation was a big issue. So I don't remember if that came up, and I just wanted to like underline that again. Like, I know it's a big issue because I remember that was an issue in Tillamook last year. I remember, and so I just want to make sure that that's always something that we remember to consider for helping.
I think that was mentioned, and I know the Head Start program has problems getting kids, you know, like where they can afford to have the building is a ride out of the area and stuff, so.
Yeah.
And I do think, I want to echo, I guess it's Martha's comment, that we do put on our agenda somewhere to deal with the very real burden of moving away from Salem, Portland, and the very real benefit that this council gets by being grounded in what's really happening in communities. So we've got two goods, and it feels badly to have the community go to all the effort they do go to welcome us, and then have only a few of us actually there. It feels like we've let the community down. Okay, I'll just speak for myself. I feel like, how are they feeling when they did all this work and there's only a few of us there? So it's a very real dilemma, and I hope at some point we have a real honest discussion about what we can do so that we don't put the communities or ourselves into that situation. So, yeah.
If I could say one thing, I think scheduling as far out in advance. I know for me, there were things already on my calendar that I couldn't do away with. And I think it was maybe a month in advance, but I need like 2 or 3 months. If I have to be gone overnight, and then some of us have small children and families.
Right.
Like, the longer that, the longer a runway, the more feasible it is. And even if we had a calendar in the year where we knew that we were going to be away, you know, that it wasn't TBD, but that, okay, we're going to wherever and it's going to be a couple nights. If I know that way in advance, sometimes things come up, but it's much easier for family planning and for business planning to accommodate. Because I really want to be at those. I learn a lot, and I just, I don't know. I've had a chance through other work that I do to travel more through Oregon this year and see the needs of what's happening throughout the state. And I do think it's really important for us to see them, because it is very different than the metro area.
And it is really hard for us to leave our jobs and our homes, and so we've got to find.
Yeah, so that was the only,
sweet spot.
I mean, and I don't know that it's anybody's fault. There's been a lot of flux this year.
No blaming.
But yeah, but that would be my
Problem solving, not looking forward. Yeah. So, I think that probably takes us into a nice segue into the next agenda. Oh, no, Eva, you wanted to say something.
I was just say for next meeting, it lines up with legislative days, and I may have some serious difficulty figuring out where I am that week.
Right.
Because I have some stuff that's coming up that I need to be present for at the legislature too.
So, I think we're already into the next agenda item,
Sure.
and Megan's going to lead us.
Yeah, I wanted to just share what's on tap for May. So legislative days, Eva, you're correct, they're the 23rd, 24th, and 25th. So maybe you can make it out for the parent dinner after after things wrap up at the legislature. But on the 25th and 26th, we'll be in Hood River in Terry's neck of the woods. We'll have a business meeting from noon to 2 on that first day. From 2:30 to 4:30, we'll meet with the Four Rivers Early Learning Hub Governance Board. They actually changed their meeting to accommodate our schedule. So I think that it will be important for as many folks who can be there to have the conversation. And then that evening, we'll have a parent dinner, just like we did in Lebanon, with parents from 6 to 7:30. And then the next day, we'll meet from 9 to noon for our business meeting, and then should have you all on the road home by noon the next day.
Wait, Pete.
and I can pass you this if you'd like it. I want to give Terry the chance to share what is being planned for our visit. If there's anything that you want to share, I think it's going to be a really kind of a cool and different governance meeting than we've had before, and I wanted to let you talk a little bit about what's been being planned.
Sure. So first, full disclosure, I'm not going to be there the evening of the 25th because my son graduates from 8th grade. So mom comes first. So we've talked a lot, and as you may or may not be aware, our geographic region for Four Rivers is huge. So, from Hood River out into Wheeler County, it's like a 4-hour drive in the car. So it's quite a distance to cover. What we call the frontier counties, Gillum, Sherman, and Wheeler, are working really hard to bring families into that dinner. So in both Gillum and Sherman counties, the county provides transportation, and so they are looking to use one of their transportation vehicles to bring families in. So I want you to recognize the effort these families will be making to get to Hood River and the cultural barriers they will be crossing to go to Hood River, because if you've never seen Fossil or Condon, it's a completely different culture than Hood River. And so for these families, it's a stretch. And when they call the Dalles the city, I have to try really hard not to roll my eyes, but it's very different. And so what Pam had asked us to highlight a little bit, and I've been working with Krista Rude, who's our hub director is the way that we look at the different early or home visiting programs as a system, not as there's no competition. It's very much we figure out which service fits the family best and try to make sure that there's a way that we can fit anybody in to services no matter where they enter. So we're going to highlight that a little bit, and the systems we're developing to streamline that even more.
Should be good.
So Chair Weber, I do want to come back to the scheduling thing a little bit, because when I saw that it was in legislative days, the practical effect is, and I'm sure this is true for you, Eva, during legislative days or the legislature, I do not schedule anything in my early morning schedule or in my evening schedule, because basically you're working all the time. You finish the day, you go back to your office, and you start working for the next day. So I think it's really critical as we go forward, and this goes to the scheduling thing, is we can't schedule on top of legislative days if we want Clyde, me, Eva to be there, because functionally it's not possible. Secondly, I think that particularly when I hear of stories that we're getting all these people to go to this stuff, I feel bad about that. I travel the state all the time now. So one option, for me is like, and I'm happy to do this, is when I'm traveling, I'll let you know, and if there's an early learning hub I can check in on while I'm in Medford anyway, that I'm happy to make those connections. I also think it would be great if we could, to your point, Kali, is get on a schedule with the hubs of here's our scheduled visit, and going out even, years, right? And to get on a rotation, because the hubs are established now. It's not, it's not the startup phase. It's the securing the gains and identifying the progress stage. So to get on some kind of regular schedule for the council and do it out far enough to drive local alignment is really going to be critical. And plus, I think we have some vacancies on the council that we need that are urgent to fill, because we're, we got to do that. That's the way we make this work. So, happy to help on all those fronts. But legislative days, and I just learned this. I've just been there 15 months. Originally, I was like, okay, the legislature's in session. I'm going to see my family tonight. Nope, oops, you're not. You're not seeing anyone for 7 months. Or in the legislative days, you're not seeing anyone for the whole period. You don't leave the office, the farm, the wherever you are. So.
I would say this time the trick with legislative days is the way that the legislature schedules it. So at the time that we had scheduled this meeting, it wasn't legislative days, now
Oh.
it is. And then it was,
wow.
it's really a lot to ask the community to change.
Well, let's go
it.
talk to them. What do you
They
mean?
need to get us a calendar.
Sorry, but it changes every year,
Yeah.
legislative days?
Yep.
The week,
Because
the week.
I think it depends on election, when does the election, so like this
so it's
year
post-election.
is like the week after, and normally I think it would be that middle week of the month of May, but, this year we have elections on the 17th.
So what I will say is next we'll be traveling in September. You have the dates on your calendars. The plan for September is to go someplace really rural, hard to get to, so that we have that experience. And
When is it, September?
September, and Alyssa can tell us the dates in a moment. We're working with Eastern Oregon CCO, and then looking to work with our 4 hubs that cover the frontier parts of Oregon to organize a conversation about the needs of rural Oregon. Lots of the details are still being figured out because it's a lot of people to pull together, but we do have the dates, and looking for a town that we can get to, but that will give us the experience of having to do that long windshield time.
I have done that we're meeting with the Education Board, State Board of Education in September, a joint meeting.
They have said that won't work for their schedule anymore, so it'll just be us.
I just noticed that it does coincide with legislative days in September.
Oh, dear
maybe
God.
Maybe we can try to move that. Scheduling's really hard with this group and everything else that we're a part
Is
of.
it in September?
I will
The
say,
20th through the
in
21st.
2017, we won't be traveling because when the legislature is in session, we don't. And we meet every other month when the legislature is in session, because with 4 agency directors and folks that work really closely with the legislature on this council, it's impossible to travel, and it's actually impossible to meet monthly. So we'll keep working on the schedule. But we are excited to get out to Hood River and to learn about what is going on out there, and really grateful to the community for the work that they've done to pull that visit together.
It's almost like, could we pull in people and call them council members for one meeting so that the community doesn't see this bare table when, because we sit like this at a meeting, and when there's only a few of us, it really feels badly.
Well, I mean, I would also invite anyone in the audience or anyone who's interested in early childhood in general to come participate in that kind of public forum with parents around the state as well.
But I think Bobby's question is a good question, because although it's going to be very difficult for me to make that, we have some people who in the department who work very closely with the ERDC program and things like that, who I think would really get a lot out of the visit and would be great representatives for DHS.
I think that's great.
We can do that
Yeah.
too. It's a good idea.
Let's think about that.
Let's explore options, because
That's a really
it
good
does
idea.
feel awful.
Yeah, no. They go through all
It
that
feels
trouble.
like we're the big guys, and if we're the important ones, and you can do all this work, and we'll decide we show up or we don't show up.
Yeah.
It just feels awful.
Yeah.
And Megan, I think that it's been mentioned to you that the Department of Ed already has a meeting with Salam being there scheduled.
They scheduled it after us.
But I think, I'm wondering how we can tie in.
Yeah.
If we can look
Alyssa's
at
working on
education
that.
from 0 to 21, if there's a way to bring the community together for that discussion, or at least piece it together or something. I know how difficult it all is.
The other opportunity is to get the council up to more people and send 3 or 4 people to each of the locations and not send the whole council everywhere. I mean, that's the other, we did that on LCDC, worked really well. No one's expectations were crushed. We always met at the meetings. We always had the presence, and it made the travel burden easier.
All right, so we'll explore options. Okay, but it does sound like, in closing, we're set for May, and September is now in exploration, given things that got on the calendar after we set our plans.
We'll have to talk to the folks we're working with in the communities and see what we can shift, and then see how we can shift so that the schedules around this table and our colleagues that aren't here can work too. So, Alyssa, you have a big next step and we'll keep working on it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So, Khalees.
Sorry, Chair Weber. I guess I want to pick up on something Lynn said about the council. I know many of us on the council have talked about folks that would be good to be on the council, and I don't know what we can do as a council to advocate for the expansion of, to fill, it's not even expansion, it's to fill the seats that are vacant on the council. And so if there are advocacy or conversations that we can have, I mean, I think what she's underscoring, it is important to have a full council. And if the state has prioritized early childhood and, supporting early childhood, why would they leave vacant seats for so long? Like, to me, it doesn't feel like they're really prioritizing what they say they're prioritizing. I'm not trying to challenge anyone, but I'm just saying, like, whatever it is that we can do to support filling those vacant seats, I think it will make a big difference for some of what Bobby is saying. So I just wanted to put that out.
I agree. Pam and I have been working with Lindsay Capps, our policy advisor, on this for months, and I think it's not a bad thing for other members of this body to reach out and ask him where we're at with that.
Oh, so it would not be out of order for us to email Lindsay and share our perception of being a council member with an unfull council?
I think at this point that's totally fine.
Okay. If you feel
I'm comfortable making that.
Yeah.
This is not a group of people that's afraid to speak their minds, so go for
I mean,
it.
all we're saying is that we feel handicapped by being an incomplete council.
I think Lindsay would be receptive to hearing from all of us too. It's not like he's somebody that doesn't appreciate feedback.
Well, thank you. Okay. This next item is just plain fun. There was this wonderful woman named Lynne Angland who sat on an organization that was our predecessor called the Commission for Childcare. And on her way to a commission meeting in Salem from Bend, she was a businesswoman in Bend, and she was on her way and was in a car accident and died. And everybody was just devastated. She'd been in her role as a business person, she had been this huge early learning champion and had played an important role in this state policy for early childhood. And so in recognition of that, the commission created something called the Lynne Angland Award, and the legislation put the commission as a part of us. So we get the Lynne Angland Award along with that, and we get to give it. So it's to recognize an unsung hero in early learning. This is a group of people who work extremely hard, do extremely important work, but for a lot of reasons our culture does not give this group of people a lot of respect, and here's a chance that we can affect that. And so it's anybody who people see as having been a champion. It could be in any role, but anybody who's making a difference in early learning. We've given the award to providers, to teacher educators, to Tina Kotek, don't put any limitations on the role that somebody could have played. Just if you think of them as a champion, as somebody who's making the Oregon better in the world of early learning. And this time, Alyssa is going to making it so easy. Can you describe, Alyssa, the process people will use to nominate?
So we've had some feedback that doing PDFs and sending in forms is kind of cumbersome. So we actually are posting a link to our website so people can submit nominations through Google Forms. And then we will send it to the CCEC for review. And if folks do prefer hard copy, then I can send those to them as well. Yeah.
And when's the due date?
The due date, I believe, is June 21st, I want to say. I'll check my notes back there. But I'm posting it onto our website now, so it's officially live, and people can start sending in their applications.
And do we have it in more languages than just
We
English?
do. We have it in English and Spanish and Russian. Yeah.
I think, have we made a specific ask of the hubs to submit candidates? Because I really think this is a piece where they should now be
Great idea.
engaging.
Great
and
idea.
Every hub should have a nominee, because that's how we make sure we get the statewide representation.
No,
And
that is a great idea.
they're no longer hublets, they're hubs. So they're good to go.
I'll make sure everyone gets those.
Yeah, and I just want to affirm, it could be a parent, it can, I mean, there is no limit. Champion is the word to think of. Somebody who's making a difference and who we want to recognize. And they will be invited to a council meeting and be given the award. And sometimes Lynne's family comes to help present the award. And it's really a kind of simple but important thing that we do as a council. So, anybody want to share any other thoughts on the Lynne Angland Award? Okay, we'll move to the preschool promise rules adoption, and if we can have Lisa Bonero Gwynn, whose name I always say wrong, Bachtel, and Kim Parker come up. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. The council has already heard these rules, I think twice. First time just a briefing, and then we've actually been through the rules. The Child Care and Education Committee has worked on them for many months and made our recommendations at the last meeting when we heard them the first time. This is a now time that we're ready to act on them. So for those who maybe don't know, our process is we talk about what's coming so that the council can start thinking about it. Then we do a first reading, at which time the council can really dig deep and pull out any issues and get them addressed. And then we come back the third time and for adoption. So that we're at that stage. We're at the third step in the process. So I'm going to turn it over to the three of you.
I will start the same way I did last month, which is to say I am here to provide nothing but moral support to these two amazing women who have done just a Herculean task in bringing us here today. So,
thank you, Kim. Good morning, members. Lisa Pinero, Early Learning Policy Specialist for the Early Learning Division. Go ahead. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, Gwen Bachtel, Preschool Promise Program Coordinator for the Early Learning Division.
So, as the chair indicated, this will be your final adoption of the Preschool Promise administrative rules for the program. And based on the first reading in March, we made some slight adjustments to address some of the concerns that were raised by the council. And we can go through those and review those if you'd like. Chair, how would you like me to proceed?
I think it would be very helpful if we heard what you did and what we raised and how you've responded.
All right. At that time, I guess I should get to the right document here. Helpful. At the time of the council's meeting, there was some discussion regarding concerns about, well, we'll just jump right to the concerns about mandatory reporting for child abuse and neglect. And the council really wanted to make it very clear that the council's intent for any of the providers that are participating in Preschool Promise were subject to the mandatory reporting law. They are subject to that law by statute, but the council wanted to articulate that that was also the council's expectation, and that the council expected providers to not only think about or react to and respond to abuse or neglect that might be happening at the present moment currently, but also that might have happened in the past in a child's life. And so we just clarified that in the language, that it is for current and or past suspected abuse. And that requirement applies to a child care provider or a professional 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is not just when they are serving in their official capacity. So the language reflects that as well. Let's see. I apologize. I seem to have lost my place in my own document. Yes, and when you know it so well, you start, some of the other questions that were raised throughout the whole rulemaking process was really about the educational requirements. As you know, we addressed those educational requirements as we could, to the extent that we could, because of the statutory limitations on that. We provided, we believe, and I think time will prove this out, that through the waiver process, we are addressing that challenge and so providing supports for providers to attain those educational requirements. I believe that is, to the extent that I recall.
Mm-hmm. Those are the two biggest.
Yeah, the two big issues.
Do you want to talk about anything in public?
Well, yes, thank you, Gwen. Gwen reminds me that we also received public comments from the public, and they addressed that very issue as well, was the issue
The
of
education
the
requirement.
educational requirements.
It does seem to have gotten more attention from all sides, council, public, and in the processes that Gwen has. And the committee talked a lot about it also.
I guess I have a question. I'm good with the rules. I appreciate all the input and work and everything. I guess my question would be, going forward, do we need to have some sort of check-in about those educational requirements and adjustments that may need to be made through legislative process? And what would that look like, I guess?
Can you hold on to that? Because I'd like us to keep this conversation moving forward on adoption of rules. What you're talking about is really important. But if we can stick to getting the rules approved, but don't forget it. And
yeah, that's why I said it out loud, so I
okay.
wouldn't.
Okay.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sure. So I apologize. I'm trying to play catch up here in a big way. And if it's more appropriate for me to have this conversation with one of these ladies offline, I'm fine with that. But I just kind of want to maybe understand the waiver process a little bit better. I read a little bit about it, but just kind of knowing that this is a big change in the educational requirement.
Do you want to address the waiver
Sure.
process?
Yeah. So within legislation for Preschool Promise, there were a set of standards, and one of those standards had to do with the bachelor's degree
Right.
for the lead teacher.
Right.
But there were many other standards around high quality early learning. And the bill gave us the ability to provide waivers for those standards as we're building capacity within the communities that are awarded Preschool Promise funding. And so the waiver process is just that we have a waiver committee that'll be reviewing any waiver requests for any of those standards that are waivable. And then the individual or provider would be submitting a quality improvement plan that demonstrates how within the year they will be making significant progress towards meeting any of those conditions of the bill for quality. And I think with the recognition, though, that around educational attainment, that'll probably be a multi-year process for those
for some
providers. So
people.
yeah. But for most of the other quality standards, our goal is within the first year
Okay.
to have those achieved.
Okay.
And this council adopted a set of principles that the waiver committee will act within.
Okay.
So the council, the legislation clearly says we're the ones who grant the waivers.
Grant the waivers.
And we spent several meetings exploring how we protect provider confidentiality and act as the legislature directed us to do. And the strategy that we adopted was to create a set of principles that the this waiver committee will act within, and at least one member of the waiver committee is a member of the council.
We actually have two, Terry and Janet, who have
that's
come forward to
wonderful.
be on the committee.
Right. So it will be meeting the letter and intent of the law, and it will protect the confidentiality. So, you know, provider Jane Doe, whole life is not on the public record,
Right.
you know. So so that's the process. We'll
And
see.
then the council will be receiving reports and updates from the waiver committee on what type of waivers have been approved, and then any progress that we're seeing from those providers towards meeting their quality improvement plans.
Because the legislature did make it clear it was this council's responsibility.
Yeah,
So
to make sure.
we are not walking away
Right,
from it.
right, okay, great.
Okay?
You ready for a motion?
Please.
Oh, I was gonna say, I moved to adopt the rules.
Second. Second.
Okay. So now the floor is open for discussion on, Khalid.
So I continue to have concerns about the rules. I had a chance to meet with our network this week and listen to providers and, you know, people. There's a woman that works with African refugee families, maternal child health. Another person that works with the African American Home-Based Certified Care Network. Another person that does home visitation, and all of them talked about the limitations of the BA requirement, the fact that family care is not really meaningfully being included, and then I have just, you know, the hubs are the mechanism. I guess I have trouble with the overall thing, and I know we can say it's set and all of that, but my conscience says even approving it is very hard for me. The hubs as the mechanism through which they are served, when hubs are not held accountable to serving all underserved kids and the most vulnerable kids, that's problematic to me. And yet the only way that they can access, you know, the only mechanism to accessing the dollars is through this mechanism that doesn't even have all of those accountability structures in place. The fact that I feel that there is an research is really clear, and there's a lot of different sources that say this, that when you raise requirements, there is a effect of reducing diversity in the workforce. And there was an article that said specifically, without well-designed education and training support to make advanced credentials more accessible, policies that raise the education requirements for entry and advancement in the field may indirectly result in reduced diversity in the workforce. And you couple that with research that talks about the value of culture and the cultural background of teachers and the fluidity it provides, particularly for second language learners, of having the same, you know, language and culture for your educator as you have in your family life. That's a big deal. That's a big deal for a lot of children in the state of Oregon. And I don't feel like we're even addressing that. As someone who sits on the board of a higher education institution, I know how many barriers there are to achieving a degree, and that's an associate's degree at the community college level. So now we're talking about four-year degrees. I can tell you percentages of who goes on to access BAs from the community college. It's very small, and there's an intensive amount of supports that are needed to support folks to do that. So this idea that, well, we'll just provide support and help them. If it was that easy, we would have done it already. And, you know, PCC has some great programs that are getting kids, or not kids, they're students, and actually most students are older. I think average age is 30. But we have programs that takes multi-million-dollar investments, and still they're not, this is associate's degree, it's not the bachelor's degree. And the higher ed, the 4 years have not had the same level of investments to really support people finishing. And when you talk about first-generation college students and the barriers that they face of all ethnicities, you know, there's just there's another layer. So I really feel like it's recycling privilege in ways. I think we need to be intentional in providing training programs that get folks, that strengthen the field. Like I believe in professional development. I believe in higher education, but the runway has not been set, and I think the people that lose out are going to be the kids that are most underserved, and they're the kids that are part of my community. And so I won't be voting in favor of the rules, and I do hope that we can, in the next legislative session, really look at this. I think Oregon for a long time has left behind a lot of kids. And I haven't even talked about like Native kids and kids on reservations. Like there's just so many kids that I feel like we're leaving behind. And I want to have legislation that is truly focused on supporting those kids.
Okay. I think that with Eva and you are raising really critical issues, and it may affect for both of you your ability to be supportive of the rule. The thing that I think, though, as a council, we need to remember that, and you've referred to it, is that this is a legislative conversation. It isn't anything the council has any ability to do in rule. The legislature didn't say a BA or equivalent, or, you know, they didn't give us, they made it really clear they meant a BA. And a council, through its rules process, cannot change the legislation. And so it may, you know, you could abstain or vote no because you just can't support what the legislation is requiring us to do, which is fine. But this conversation, I think, belongs in another arena about, does the council want to have any influence? Do we want to give feedback to the legislature or have some kind of legislative agenda that deals with, which feels like a very different discussion than the rules? So, Eva?
Yeah, so yes. And I'm so glad to hear you say everything that you just said. I mean, this is something that I have struggled with, but I also know this is what we have. This is what we've been tasked to do. So that's why I ended up chairing the ad hoc to try to get something out, and that was reflective of doing the waivers, because one of the questions that Chair Doherty asked during the legislative process was, can there be waivers? Does this mean? And I believe she was told there could be some flexibility in waiver process, and that's what we have. And then the council decided that the legislation only gave room for a little bit of wiggle room. So that's why I made the motion to support the rules. And totally respect that if you need to say no, please do so, because that's important that we all are able to say what we need to say and make things better. Because if we continue to just always say yes and then move on and let it go, it's not going to get better. I also, so I guess going forward, I think part of our role is, in developing policy, in promoting what works for all children, is to say, okay, how do we figure out what we need and what are those supports, and how are we not just recycling privilege, like you said. I loved that. So, what do those questions and what does that report look like, and how do we get it done in a timely enough fashion that by September 26th, a legislator can have a report and then have a legislative concept in hand to go forward and actually do what we need done?
Chair Weber, may I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I think you make a really good point, and Bobby makes a good point about the rules in front of us today, and Kali and Eva make good points about the barriers that are in the way, with a lack of what I would consider, it's maybe a little bit of a risk to say this, but I think I would say there's no coherent path to a bachelor's degree or higher education in this state right now, that's statewide for our workforce, and that's a problem, and it's one we're hoping to address in the next legislative session. But since this continues to be a concern for this policy body and many of our constituents, I might suggest that the path to having a legislative conversation about it is through the governor's office, through our policy advisor. And so I can look to set that kind of conversation up with Lindsay, so that it can be had. This bill was one that Governor Brown really championed. So I think if the policy body that's appointed by her has concerns about it, we need to have that conversation through the channel of the governor's office, and see what that winds up looking like. So I would be happy to organize that with Lindsay and give you a venue to share your concerns directly there.
So one of the things I do want to highlight is there are some paths, and in fact, there is a private college in Oregon that has committed its portfolio, its effort entirely to taking first-generation college students of diverse backgrounds and getting them through college in 4 years, ensuring they have the funding to do it, and directing them and inspiring them to be preschool teachers and teachers specifically to address the need. So I think part of what we need to do is update our information and look at that as well, because this college has defined its mission to address this specifically. And so there are some good examples. I'm not saying it's where it needs to be, but there are some very concrete advances in Oregon that we need to factor into our thinking.
Are there any other comments about the motion that's on the floor, which is the adoption of preschool promise rules? Anything before we vote that it doesn't end the conversation about preschool promise and these other avenues, but if we can focus on the rules right now. Anything, any other, are we ready to vote? I'd like to call for the vote. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Martha, I want to be sure that we get your vote.
I think she's been bouncing on and off.
Yeah,
so
because we keep hearing that noise.
lost her in a snowstorm.
Yeah, or maybe it's mute. Martha?
No, I think she goes off because she's working on, I mean, she's pulling away from work to participate in the meeting.
And she's trapped in a snowstorm, so I think it is some connectivity issues.
Oh.
Do we need her vote for a quorum? Or do
That
we
was
have a
going to be
quorum?
my question. Melissa, do we need her vote for the quorum? No. Well, I feel badly. As hard as she's working to participate, to not give her a chance to vote, but it feels like we have one no and the rest ayes, and so the motion has passed. And Lisa, please go forward to give us a set of preschool promise rules. The hubs will be thrilled that they have a firm set of rules in place to continue their work. And thank you for all that each of you has done.
And I would say, Bobby, thank you very much. You were thinking of this too, and all the committees that you've sat on, and to those who have been involved in the various committees. Thank you.
And our heroes who are going to sit on the waiver committee. I went, oh my goodness, that's where the rubber hits the road.
You're going to have a pile in May.
So
I just have a comment. Although it's not about the rule adoption, I really want to thank Kali for bringing her concerns forward. And not only do I hope that this puts it on the record so that it's there for the legislature, but I hope that early childhood advocates that have the ear of legislators take those concerns forward as well. That I absolutely, that was not a discussion about children in the metro area. That was a discussion about children all over Oregon, and I just really hope that the advocates that are working with us hear the very real concerns we have moving forward and take that to heart.
Eva?
I also want to bring up and wonder if this is a future conversation. Can we have a larger conversation about mandatory reporting and how we explain that role to people? Because all public employees are mandatory reporters, and I think that's and we're mandatory reporters, and I have a very real and recent example of how I sat and debated whether or not I should report something. So, and I was able to review I was like, oh, look, here, I have the statute right in front of me. But not everybody does. So how do we as a council promote the role of mandatory reporter, make it so it's not intimidating, make it so that it is understandable, and that it isn't just when you're at work. It is a 24/7 role as a citizen. And how do people who are not necessarily mandatory reporters by law feel comfortable doing reporting as well?
So maybe we could ask staff to do a brief report for us on how it's currently, how the level of awareness of what it really means to be a mandatory reporter is done for the multiple audiences that that are, I mean, it's a huge percent of Oregonians who are covered.
Yeah.
If you're an employee of OSU, you're a mandatory reporter, and anyway, so can you just give us a brief in response to her question about what do we do, what is in, you're asking for something simpler than the statute itself, that goes with the statute.
I guess,
Right.
well, and like, how
Is that
do, how do we, I guess, and I've even had questions about this in my role as, AFSCME representative when one of our library clerks knew that the law had changed and that they were then covered, and they're like, what does that mean? Like, how do I know? What, and like the video they found that the video wasn't helpful at all. Like watching the mandatory video that they have to watch as public employees was just like, well, that didn't answer very many of my questions, because like, how do you report something when you're not quite sure who people are and you're just passing like it's in passing, and like, that something's troubling, but what do you do with that? Like, so I guess maybe a little bit more in depth than just a simple review of, yep, you're a mandatory reporter, here's a reiteration of what's in the video, but what does it really mean, and how is it not silly to make a call if you're not even sure who people are?
We can look into, I would say all of our staff at the Early Learning Division are also mandatory reporters. So we have an understanding of what we've been trained on. We're also not experts on how to do what you're asking, but we'll look into what is available through the state. I think we can get that.
DOJ does a great job of because there are risks to it, and you want to stay within the zone of appropriateness. So I think we could just ask DOJ to come give the council a 30-minute.
And then I think also, part of a little piece of the struggle that I was having, I was like, oh, is this a situation of this parent is just trying to do the best that they can with what they have and really making bad decisions, and like, how do but it was like,
Judgments.
Yeah, it was, so how do, and I think that's what, the library clerk that asked me the questions about what does this mean as the mandatory reporter was getting at too. Like, who am I to judge? I don't know what's going on in that person's life.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, I am turning the gavel over to Janet, because this is not an action item, but this is the case in which this is number one step in the three-step process. We're alerting you to issues related to the new regulated subsidy rules, and then you'll get your first reading at the next month.
And I asked Lisa to join us.
Please.
Yeah.
Do you want me just to kick it off with a little bit of
Please do.
Background? Before I get into the specifics of this rulemaking that the council needs to do around the new category of regulated subsidy providers, I also just want to talk a little bit about the respective roles and how we collaborate between DHS and the Early Learning Division around this, because it has some implications for this particular rulemaking process. Employment-related daycare has two sources of funding. Majority of it comes from the Child Care Development Fund, which goes to the Early Learning Division that we then pass to DHS to run employment-related daycare. And it also receives general fund funding, which actually significantly increased during the 2015 legislative session. So DHS, as the statutory agency for employment-related daycare, is responsible for setting policy around rates and rules involving providers. And also that relationship with DHS also, I think, really allows strong collaboration around self-sufficiency and integration with programs like SNAP. With the new authorization, which is then coming to this set of rules, so sorry for the little bit long-winded way of getting there, but I think it's helpful background. When CCDF was reauthorized, for the first time in really a decade, came with a new set of rules around providers who are receiving CCDF funds to provide child care. One of the new rules is that all providers who are receiving subsidies, whether they are licensed or license exempt, now need to be subject to regular health and safety monitoring. Since that regulatory monitoring function was something that the Early Learning Division was already doing through child care licensing, when the legislature took this up in 2015, the decision was to make that regulatory responsibility for these for license-exempt providers under CCDF, to give that to the division to handle that kind of work, since it was already aligned with work that the division was doing. So, which also means that the council, as the rulemaking body, needs to be making rules for these new health and safety monitoring for license-exempt providers, and the brief that we provided with you provides a little bit of that information. Internally, to help with collaboration, we have a relatively new child care policy team that involves both DH staff and ELD staff, and we've been really working very closely with Rhonda and her team to make sure that we're sort of working together on some of these policy discussions. And Rhonda and her staff has also been joining in on the CCEC discussions as the rulemaking has begun around this process.
And I am here because I chair the Child Care and Education Committee, and we're the Rules Advisory Committee, and so we are the people who have been working on the development of these new rules with the support of Lisa and an amazing team that's supporting us. Relative in Oregon, the Reauthorization Act of 2014 left states the ability to put relatives underneath this or not. And in Oregon, I believe the DHS decision is that this is going to apply to exempt providers who are not relatives, and there's a definition of how close, it's grandparents and relatively close relatives who are going to be exempt. In my other hat, I have looked at that. I think we're going to be surprised at the high percentage of this population that are relatives, because it's what all families do, and especially low-income families do, is the research says is use relatives. So we'll see how big a population we are now going to be regulating. I just want to highlight one thing, and why it's so important that this tight relationship exists between ELD and DHS, is this is unusual in that eligibility to participate as a regulated subsidy provider will remain with DHS. It's the health and safety inspections and rules, and then inspecting for those rules that is in ELD. So this partnership is going to stay tight. That and the rules, if you that we're going to be giving to you, deal with health and safety, not with eligibility and training, because those two pieces remain in DHS rules, not in ELD rules. So I think if you've got enough background, I'll present what I perceive from the work of the committee. The committee's met many times on this already, and we've made it partway through the rules, and we're trying really hard to get done in one more meeting in our walk through the rules. So I'll move into what I perceive as the two substantive issues that are underneath our work and that raise the issues we're going to be bringing to you. And the first one is very similar to the conversation we just had about the BA requirement. So who these rules are being written for is a group of providers of care to children who are not regulated. That's what it means to be legally exempt. So they're not a registered family, they're not a certified family, they're not a certified center. And I'm now going to be talking about the home base part of this. So they're home base. I think we would think of them as friends and neighbors. And we've got a real challenge in terms of we have two goods that we need to find the right balance for in the rules. The one good is that relates directly to the families who use the subsidy program. And we have research that shows that about 2/3 of them have barriers to using the regulated supply. The barriers are typically that they work non-standard hours, they work unpredictable schedules, they have seasonal work, so they work for, I remember one mom's story. She works for the U of O in their catering for athletic events. So she'll work a lot for a period of time, like when there's some kind of conference going on, regional competition, and then she'll go periods of time that she doesn't work. She needs childcare that fits that. Or it may be these families who want linguistic or cultural congruity with their family. And in these cases, it is very hard to find regulated care that they'll go out of business actually trying to meet. So I know on Tuesday that I'm going to work Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, and not these other days. So the provider is going to have intermittent care and care at times that she's not even going to be open. And so these families have a real need for very flexible care that can fit. So put that on one side. That's a good. We're lucky. There are states that just don't serve this population. I've always been very pleased that Oregon has created a subsidy program that does serve these, but there are states that only will allow a family to use the regulated supply, and so since we only serve about 16 to 20% of the people who are eligible, there's always going to be plenty of people but it just means that they can basically work in an 8 to 6 schedule, and it's predictable and not seasonal. So that's one good. The other good is the one that is highlighted in the law, that these children deserve healthy, safe environments, that they have maybe even more need for the kinds of protections that our rules processes are designed to provide children. And That is clearly the legislative intent of Congress in passing the 2014 authorization, that no public dollars will be spent in a facility that we do not have evidence of providing a healthy and safe environment for children. And we can all agree to that. So here's the challenge. These two don't fit too well together. And so what we have been struggling with, and literally struggling with every section of the rules, is what's the sweet spot? Where do we do both as well as we can do it? So that's number one issue, and that we're doing the best we can to find that sweet spot, but you may disagree with us. I mean, and we want you to be thinking about this issue before you get the rules, because this, you may find a better way than the committee does to try and find this spot. Okay. So that's issue one. Issue two is a little different. It has to do with exempt centers. So we have in Oregon exempt centers. They're exempt because they only provide part-day care, or they're exempt because they're run by a public agency and the Oregon statute allows them to remain exempt. Those are the two major reasons that programs are exempt. These programs typically don't serve the needs of this population because of their schedules very well. But for a very small percentage of children, this is what the parents want for their children. And the numbers, we're still struggling with the estimate because the estimating the publicly exempt is more complicated. But in terms of the other kinds of exempt Part D programs, the estimate is very low, and I, in my work, have looked for years at where subsidy children are, and the data I've looked at shows it's less than 1% of the kids. So we don't have a lot of our children in exempt centers, and there are not a lot of exempt centers.
You said less than 1% of children are?
Yeah, I'd want to look at it again, but less than 1%.
Or subsidy kids in these
Subsidy
non-exempt
in
centers.
this type of care. We have about half of our kids in exempt family friends,
care,
and
yeah,
neighbors, but that includes relatives and.
We also need to pull the data from our special populations programs, because they would also be covered by the same rules. So we need to do a little bit more data analysis on this.
Like the children in the A&D programs are the ones that I'm aware of, that the A&D programs that we fund to provide child care so that the parent can finish their drug treatment. I don't believe those, I don't know, we're staff. I don't believe that those programs are regulated programs. So we have this small number, but important. The question that is in front of us, though, we already have a rather complex regulatory system for centers in that we certify centers, and we have something the legislature gave us called recorded programs. That's a little bit hard to understand, but they are not required to be regulated. They're required, though, to tell the early learning division that they exist and that their staff get criminal records checks. And whether they do it or not is not even completely clear. I mean, whether they even know they need to do it is not completely clear, and then how many of them do it. So anyway, so we have these two categories. The concern is we'd be adding a third category called regulated subsidy. I think we're making it really difficult. This is a personal opinion, but the committee talked about it. The concern of parents have to understand what we're doing, providers have to understand what we're doing. Is it really a good idea to add a third regulatory category for this small group of programs? And so, I'm sorry, that is one.
Can I also just add one little piece of background on this? Since this would, in the end, be a ERDC eligibility issue, this would also be a DHS policy decision in the end. So I
Absolutely.
just want to make sure that piece is also clear.
Our question is just whether we write the rules. I mean, that's all we would do, is write the rules and enforce the rules. DHS will make the decision that that they're going to make these programs eligible or ineligible. And one of the rules that the CCEC is playing, that I should have said, is even though we have no responsibility for eligibility and training, we do have a role in communicating to DHS what we think is appropriate. Just like we're having them on our committees to help us write the health and safety inspection rules, we have a role. It's only just in sharing the council's idea. The council would have this, not the committee. We will recommend to the committee. To the council. The committee never acts. We just recommend. But we can, as the council, when we work on these rules, make and give any advice that we think appropriate to DHS. That is within our charge. So, Colleen, I'm so sorry. Okay.
No, it's okay. I was just curious about the issue too, and the center-based non-exempt. Can you give examples of who? So you're saying less than 1% of subsidy kids are in those settings. So, and they're part-time settings.
They're all part-time.
Are they? What are they?
So
ABC preschool.
There's a couple different categories of license exempt. One of the categories is license exempt preschools, which is, and if I get this wrong, someone correct me, fewer than 5 hours, serving 3 and 4-year-olds, and having an educational focus. So that's a category of license exempt preschools. Then there's also a license exempt category for childcare facilities run by public entities. And that could be anything from the city of Portland to a community college to a public school. And so that's also a pretty broad category. And those categories are all in statute, that if you meet those requirements, that you can provide care and are exempt from licensing.
But you may be licensed. I think it's really important. You could be licensed.
The crux of my question is this, because this is about a child care subsidy. Are we limiting, if those places are, say, these like small Montessori school or schools that are pedagogically shown to have results with children, and those schools tend to not be accessible to underprivileged kids. If we're saying that by only allowing subsidy in the exempt and not in those non-exempt, and those non-exempt have characteristics like, say, a small Montessori school, I feel like we're limiting children's access to programs that they already don't have a lot of access, like low-income children's access to programs that they already don't have a lot of access to. But I don't know enough about that non-exempt category to know. And so I think that's like my question. Are we limiting what low-income kids have access to
Colleen, can I
by
ask
putting stipulations on?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Because I've heard you say non-exempt. So if they're not exempt, they're a licensed center and they have access to subsidy. But what Bobby is raising is for exempt preschools, which are usually preschools like David described that provide care and education for a small number of hours, and they're mostly preschools at churches.
Oh,
so a lot of
interesting.
faith-based preschools that do.
So those
a
kids
little bit.
couldn't go there if they needed the EDRC. They couldn't go to the little church preschool.
Well, I don't know.
Or
I don't
I
understand
think
that.
the reason that
I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand.
I think the reason that we find so few subsidies going to those kinds of programs is because the subsidy is designed for working families, and most of those programs are half-day, part of the week programs, so they don't meet the needs of working families.
But you just talked about the fact that there are working families that are working in all sorts of configurations, intermittent work, and some of them, you know, like I think, I don't know, working families is a big category, and it looks different for different families, and they're definitely.
So what we know, and and we actually discussed this yesterday at that joint, and we're going to pull some more data, but you know, of what is it, about 12,000 children on subsidy? When we pulled it for July, there were 80 who were in license exempt centers.
Okay.
So it's a very small percentage. So, I mean, what we know is that since the parents choose the program, when parents receive subsidy and they choose the program, we know that very few of the parents who receive subsidies are choosing license exempt
Okay,
centers.
so there's no barrier by the EDRC.
There's currently no barrier.
Okay.
But
Thank
the
you.
question is, do we create now a whole new regulatory monitoring system for that very small
Okay.
class?
Because they would only move into that if a parent with the subsidy wanted to use them. It would have no impact on the other exempt programs, because they'd have to, it only applies if you're going to care for a child on the subsidy.
So a couple things here, and stepping back just a little bit from this. So right now in Oregon, we are perilously close, if not already there, to not having enough kids vaccinated in the population to support population health. So part of what I want to get clear about here is we're zeroing in on really tight categories, and that's important to do. I'm not saying it isn't. But we also need to kind of get our head out of the weeds and get our heads around some of the core basics. We've created a tremendously complex framework for a significantly small state. And part of what I want to get us back to is there are core fundamental principles that if we don't get in place, all this other stuff is not going to matter, right? We've spent in the last year in Oregon, I've only been here 15 months, we've done meningitis, Ebola, and we're now getting ready for Zika. And so, and then in our own state health standards, we are not passing vaccination levels that many states would say are basic public health. So the piece I think we need to bring here, and the hard part for me to have this conversation is, I think adding regulatory burden to people when we're not meeting the core is really absurd and drives not to public health but drives to absurdity. So the frame I want to set is a grid of kids in childcare and some kind of, there are this many kids in this many categories regulated by this, and identifying in that discussion, and those kids in those populations have to have this bare minimum thing. And the other thing I would say is the criminal background checks. I mean, the criminal background checks are fundamental. What happens to a child who's abused in a daycare setting, it doesn't matter whether they're a baby or a 6-year-old or a 13-year-old, the effects are lifelong trauma and the costs are millions of dollars per child. So I think the thing we want to do, for me, I would like to see the staff put together, where are the kids in childcare in Oregon, in what categories of care, what are they getting, what are the regulation? Because again, I'd be willing to put some more regulations on the table for everyone that are core and fundamental, and if they're not in place, the other stuff isn't going to matter. But I don't have a good picture. I know there's a lot of kids in childcare. I want to have that childcare for those overnight, the mom who's working the food service at U of O and all that. We need to have all that in place, but we need to also acknowledge this is not the 50s healthcare environment. The 2015-16 healthcare environment is dramatically different than what it was before, and there are some basics that we don't have in place in Oregon right now. And so they make the risk, to tie the two thoughts together, when you don't have enough people vaccinated, the importance of that vaccination in that microenvironment that you're describing goes up tenfold. Because in the old days, in the 50s, you had enough people vaccinated, or 60s or 70s, to that core, that foundation was in place. And so I want us to have that conversation in an informed way, but I want to bring to it the public health standards that are critical and are not currently being achieved.
It sounds like you're asking not just to have a conversation about how we're regulating, but what are the standards we're actually regulating to.
Yes, and I
the
think
health and
that
safety
discussion,
standards.
before you layer on more stuff and expectation, I think this is the group of people that needs to take a position on what is core and basic. And if those core and basic things are not in place, it's great to have these other things, but
Okay, I have a couple of thoughts before we give staff direction about what to give us back. These.
Can I add a comment at some point too, please?
Sure.
These rules apply to the children on subsidy only. So I feel like we've got two conversations that are very relevant for the council. One is the conversation about the new set of rules, and the second is the broader conversation. And I think we've created a grid that is really relevant for that second conversation, and I'm wondering if the two have to come together, but I'd like to be sure we at least keep them separate, because we're going to act on one and we have a plan for acting on the other. So we have a grid that shows the whole regulatory category across.
Oh, we do.
And we've got the categories of what standards they have to meet.
with the number of kids in those categories. That's the piece I'm interested in.
No, and I don't know, that would
It can
be
be
in
an
addition to
estimate.
it, but we've got the grid, and we
I think we have
probably-
the data, we just
we
need
could
to
It's a,
populate it.
it's a scale of
populate it.
challenge question. If we don't have the numbers of kids, I mean, that directly relates to this rulemaking. If we're talking about additional rules for 4 kids in the state of Oregon, obviously, that we don't really need to do that, because we've got some other priorities we should be getting in place. So that's
So it
my.
just feels like if we can keep them separate, I mean, I'm not saying we don't bring them back, but we keep them separate. One is the rules that we need to create relatively quickly in order to meet the federal requirements. And the other is what direction you're going to give the Child Care and Education Committee and the staff supporting us in terms of what we need to do. We already are with you on trying to get comparability where it's appropriate across every set of rules that this council is responsible for by category. And so I think what we'd be asking staff to do is just adding a row that included an estimate of how many children are in each one of those care. And the committee's working under this, and we'd be bringing it as an information item. I have a question of whether that's going to confuse, whether we're going to be able to do that and focus on these rules in the same meeting.
I think that's easy. I think that's entirely possible.
And we've got a
inform that.
plan for when we're taking up all the rules to bring them into this kind of consistent way of thinking about rules. So I see lots of hands. I'm sorry,
Well,
Martha.
Martha, do you want to?
Yeah, and hopefully I don't cut out. I apologize. I'm driving across Wyoming and I'm in and I'm out. But I want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with Lynn in that we need to figure out what we've got going on. Instead of continuing to make rule upon rule upon rule, we need to have a baseline. And even if that delays some of our rulemaking, I'm okay with it. Let's get the data.
The question I have, so the monitoring of health and safety currently falls to the Early Learning Division through the child care program. But part of that is a requirement that local public health inspect their facility. And the immunization tracking piece also falls to local public health. So I'd like an estimate of what that burden is going to be. Like how many more places are we thinking that your regulators are going to have to go in and inspect?
But they inspect. This is not the environmental health inspectors are, the inspection is done by licensing staff.
And they check the immunization records, licensing.
And for
process.
registered family, that's the case now.
So this will not be added to the, not to that, but to the immunization programs review. Because we currently review childcare centers. So by February, we've seen everybody's records and.
Well, let's get back,
made
I'm
sure
not,
they're in compliance.
their certification and registration levels, we have certified centers and certified family, and they work with your staff work with those. They do not work directly with registered family, and I don't believe that registered families send their vaccination records to you either, but we'll get clarification on that.
I thought, just on the most current thing, I have several things. I'm like, oh gosh.
Let's add that to the group.
So I think on the vaccinations, the licensing specialists check immunization records and then report back to public health. Is that correct? Because that's the way I thought it was. Because I don't think there's a public health person that goes to certified family either.
Yeah, they're required to submit their vaccine records.
Right, and I know that licensing, that's one of the things that licensing specialists check, or at least some do some of the time.
I don't know our rules as deeply as our licensing staff, so we're gonna research that and come back.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't wanna give wrong information.
So I think that would be just like, that's our intersection. On the DHS subsidy, when a provider who doesn't currently take subsidy wants to take care of a family who does subsidy, they fill out a form and they have to provide a background check. There is a form that's used, and then the parent submits a form saying, I'm going to go to this provider, so that the documents, so they could have more than one provider too. So they could go to the church preschool for X number of hours in a day, and then also have grandma or auntie taking care of the child, doing the wraparound care, or a licensed setting. So they just need to fill out the paperwork that goes to DHS to say, we've done the criminal background checks, here are our criminal background checks, we've met all these other requirements as well. And I know that it was updated as recently as June of last year, because somebody was asking me questions about why it went from 2 pages to 8. I'm like, well, because of the federal requirements. So I know just about anybody licensed or licensed exempt can take care of children on subsidy. They just have to do the procedures and paperwork. And then my other question is to you, I guess, is so Early Learning Division staff will be in charge of health and safety inspections. Early Learning Division staff are currently doing licensing inspections. How will DHS be doing inspections? How do inspections that are currently being done not overlap or become a second, how are we not already doing programs that are covering the same thing? I want to make sure that we're not duplicating services, because that's one of the goals of the Early Learning Division, is to make sure that there is not a duplication in services, and that, if you definitely protect children. If something's about safety, keep it about safety. If something is about, compliance, keep it about compliance. But, let's find a way that we're not duplicating services.
Yeah, Eva, I think that's a fair statement, and we're just gonna have to work really closely together and collaborate to make sure that we're not sending people from each of our respective agencies to inspect the same person twice within the period of 2 months or something like that.
For the same day.
But I don't envy the challenge of rule writing around this, because I've done enough of it during my career. But, for me, there are a couple basic things, right? So we're doing this in compliance with a federal mandate or a federal law. One of the things I would kind of like to know, and I'm sure Rhonda will help me, is where do we have flexibility to make decisions, and which are things that are kind of like, we had this discussion just in the last issue around what's in statute, right? So if we have areas where we have flexibility and we can make some choices, that it would be really good for me to, or us, I think, to know that. And the other piece of it is getting back to Lynne's point about new regulation for 4 people. So even, I don't want to get in trouble with saying this, but there are times when we look at federal law and say, so what's the risk of not complying? And what's the penalty of not complying? And that goes into more the risk management area as opposed to risk avoidance. I mean, I don't want to, I guess it's not, it wouldn't be a good choice for me to spend $500,000 to avoid a risk of $20,000. So I guess that's kind of some of the things that as we move forward, kind of the information would be helpful to me to make decisions on what the rule should look like. And I know Rhonda's gonna get to spend some time with me around this. Lucky Rhonda.
I do want to point out that in your, under tab 2, you have, and it says what's required under Child Care and Development Block Grant. And so you do have a synthesis of,
Yeah, and
of
it's
what.
not so much about the requirements, it's more like this discussion
no.
about is the populations you're going to pull into this. And for me, that's kind of the more relevant. I look through the requirements and I can't argue with any of them. And if somebody who's a provider says, no, these are not what we should be doing, I'd have some concerns about the provider.
I would just share, and I think Rhonda will help you take a really deep dive into ERDC, but we have about 8,000 families a month on the rolls, or 8,000 children. Okay, so, but how many? Several thousand?
It's about 7,800.
Okay, so 7,800 families at any point in time, and the risk to not following the reauthorized federal rules is we will not have the child care development fund in our state, which is hundreds of millions of dollars.
And that's the kind of stuff I need to.
Yeah,
professional development and
because
care
it leads me,
and,
I mean, I think it just helps us say we don't have a choice here and we better do it because the risk of not doing it is too great.
There would be basically
also
no
have
subsidy
Oregon
program and no Office of Child Care and no professional development in the state without it. Yeah.
And I think, and I'm not sure this fully came across, I think the issue on the rules for the licensed exempt centers was, do you create a new set of rules for them or require them to be under licensing, which have a which will probably, would likely have more details on the nature of the facilities and the requirements around the facilities.
All right, that's helpful.
Could we come back to Bobby's first piece of it? So we've talked about the license exempt centers a lot, but the first piece that you shared is how do we do this without placing so many burdens on families that they can't get the care that they need because we're held up in a swirl of trying to get out to do the licensing inspection.
And they already feel that
we haven't
burden.
talked about that, but it was a big piece that you put on the table.
Lynn?
Okay, so I just want to keep us clear because we're going to, there's home-based rules, regulated subsidy, home-based rules, and regulated subsidy center rules. And, okay, and now we're going to go back to home-based.
So here's one idea that may be helpful, is in other regulatory settings, you often do essentially and I think this is, I know the A&D rules enough to be dangerous. You often do like a pyramid to say, okay, this amount of the regulation is covered under the A&D rules, so you don't need to do the additional rules for the child care that's going on in the A&D settings because you've covered the food quality rule, you've covered the criminal background check rule, you can check off those boxes, done. And so particularly for these home providers, and probably we have some responsibility here and could work with DHS to do this, but to the extent that we can create administrative rules and their pages and they have all their stuff, but to the extent that we can lift that up to something that is accessible to someone who wants to take care of a few kids in their house, and it's, here's the checkbox, do these things, and that's all you have to do. I mean, I think the burden, we have to, so two proposals. One is tier out the regulation and figure out who falls out at each level, and I can show you how to do it in You know, we do this with environmental rules, we do this with any number of rules all the time. Here's what the feds cover. They cover all this. Here's what we need to cover. But the other piece, separate, for these people who are doing this work is, here's what you got to do. And it's written in plain language. It's a page or two at the most. It has ideally a quick form, not 8 pages. The feds are the masters and Buddhas of explosion of forms. But I think we have some obligation to do that communication step, because when you tell people to go onto a website and look at the administrative rules, you know, they're good for lawyers, yay, but they're not good for, and that conversion requirement is on us, I really think, if we want to ensure the capacity is there.
I want to remind people that they're only in this category if they're caring for under 4 children from more than one family. So we are talking about people who are talking mainly, the research shows, 1 to 2 kids. These are not facilities with lots of children in them.
There was another tension that I think came out in the last, when the CCEC committee discussed these rules. I think that goes to what Lynne was talking about. There's also a tension between brevity and clarity, was one of the things I think the committee was really struggling with, of having the shortest possible description, but sometimes that short description, does it really give clear enough direction? So as a provider, you know when you can tell the parent, I can't accept this kid, because do you say you can't accept the kid when they're sick, or do you say if they're throwing up and you know? So so I think that was the other tension that the committee was really struggling with as it worked through the rules, that you'll see, I think, when the rules come back to this group.
The committee is great. We've got all these voices that people who don't necessarily agree with one another, and because they bring really different perspectives, and it's very helpful. Okay.
I'm just trying, I mean, the areas that you laid out, both in your talking points and then on this document, I don't know if we're answering them. You asked whether it is appropriate to create an additional set of rules, and I don't know if you're hearing that from the council, or I'm not clear.
We have no choice but to, for home-based, but to set a rule. And
So
and it's going to be DHS's decision whether we have to create the center rules. But the issue before we just move headlong was to get a sense from the council of, should we create yet another regulatory category for an already confused public, because what in the world is the difference between a certified center and a recorded program? I mean, it's already confusing, and now we will be adding, we'll have certified centers in Oregon, we have recorded programs in Oregon, and we're going to have, and if so, we would have, if we did it, we'd have regulated subsidy centers.
Yeah, which seems like it's too
for
much.
this very small number of children. So that is, as David pointed out, that's DHS's decision, not ours, but we're bringing it forth because the council does have a role in giving DHS our opinion, but it's not our decision.
So I would just say, I think what I've heard is that we don't want to make things any more difficult than they already are, and that there's a value around the user experience and ensuring that, we're not creating barriers.
Is the option, is the do that, what's the or? Is to put it into light, I mean, what's our choice?
If DHS says we do want a category for health and safety for these centers, we will create a new set of rules called regulated subsidy, and our licensing specialists will inspect them. And so that's one option. The other option is DHS could say, even if you're exempt, by the way, you can get licensed. A lot of the public schools and almost all of the colleges that operate child care centers, even if they're part day, get licensed. I mean, it's a choice. And DHS could say to a program, if you want to care for DHS children, you need to meet the Early Learning Division Certified Center. But I mean, that isn't our decision. All we're doing is giving DHS our best thinking.
That helpful?
Clear as mud. I'm glad I came.
I think one of the concerns that I think I've heard, but not explicitly said, and maybe it's because I also don't. So, am I understanding correctly? I know that for a licensed facility, they can't operate until they are licensed, correct? Like if they're brand new. But a licensed exempt facility, a family that is a mom gets a job. She's like, woohoo, I have a job. I also know that I qualify for ERDC. They could go to a licensed exempt person, get that paperwork turned in, and start getting care immediately. Or if they already have the relationship with auntie or neighbor or whomever, so they don't have to wait for that licensing to kick in.
You know what? Can we come back to you with exact information on the timing question? Megan's raising it and you're raising it now, and get clear. I don't think that's completely accurate because there are certain things you have to do before you can get a DHS payment.
Right. Well, I know you have to fill out. You have to do the criminal background check. You have to fill out the 8-page form. I know that, and turn it in and get approved. So, but if you're already a licensed exempt provider, say you've been taking care of neighbor A, and then neighbor B says, hey, can I come? And you're already approved. So they don't have to get the licensing inspection. But then that person could go through the process of becoming licensed as they're taking care of children as an exempt person, right? So, and I know that for in-home providers, many of them have started as licensed exempt and gone into regulated care, and then eventually some of them go to certified too. So what's the easiest path for parents and providers so that parents who are like, oh gosh, I have a job, now I need care, and if the fastest option is a licensed exempt, how do we make it easy for them and then encourage them if the path is to go to license?
The committee has already asked staff
Okay.
to work with DHS to give us a very clear line on what is it now in terms of timing. Are there, do you go into a temporary status, and the children can receive care? All those questions we've already asked, the committee has already asked staff, but we don't have the answers yet.
So I agree. Yes, what's the easiest? Like what are the basic criminal background check ever? Yes, that's absolutely. But how do we make sure everybody's got the access to the care that they need?
Yeah, if we could get really good information on that next time. That is my personal biggest concern in terms of what this could do to working families who have unpredictable schedules, or the mom that gets a job and knows that her neighbor can care for her child and qualifies for subsidy. I don't want the time lag to cause that mom to not be able to show up at her job the next Monday because
Or even
her
the next
friend
day.
because we haven't inspected her friend. And I have the strong commitment to the health and safety requirements. So that tension is my personal biggest concern in thinking about overseeing these rules. And I feel like I need more of an understanding of the conversation that's happened at the committee and a resolution that is family friendly and keeps kids safe.
I just want to say too, I spoke with a home-based provider. No, this was a parent. There's like 24-hour childcare. And she was saying like the lack of access, she works the night shift. She said the untold story is that there are a lot of families leaving their kids by themselves to work these night shift jobs. And she's like, I had to do it. I'm embarrassed by it. No one talks about it. She said it's so prevalent in the community because we don't have the options we need. And so it was a very like, whoa. And these are like 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And as a mother, I just thought, I can't imagine that choice. And so I feel like the barrier thing is very real.
Yeah,
and
it's like one of those things like.
yeah, so I just say that to say like there are like we need to not put moms or dads or anybody in the position of having to choose that over
Right, and what do you
care.
do with that information? Because that
Did
that
you
goes back to
report?
my
No, this was
conversation.
before. Her child is older now.
I know, but that goes.
Was that a mandatory report? Like
Yeah.
even though the child's not of age? Yeah. Oh dear goodness.
See,
Okay.
and that's what I was.
I think
We'll be
I
doing
think
that training in
there's
June.
some- You know, I don't know if it would be helpful, but I have, Ellen Scott is a researcher at University of Oregon who has done studies where she actually does in-depth interviews with subsidy parents. And we're just publishing an article, and she agreed to sharing some of these family stories that are relevant to this issue of work shifts and flexibility and timing and all those. And I shared it. She gave permission to share it with the committee members, and if anybody on the council would like it, it's an easy read. It's a couple pages of stories. But it's what you're talking about. It's what do the families actually, who have these barriers, actually do?
So there's two things, though, that we can learn from the ACA that are really important here. First of all, again, I'm just going to come back to this. Small state. We are in a small state. 3.9 million people, and we have computers. We should know how many people are in what categories of childcare and how many people in our workforce need what kind of childcare. That's a grid with numbers and data. And parallel to that, other lesson from the ACA is we're just now getting all this data about what happens when, and in this case, we're working with the most vulnerable people in the state. What happens when you make it too complicated? They get worse care because they can't figure it out, because it's very, we did beautifully complicated healthcare plans and trying to cover every contingency. And what happened is no one can understand it because, by the way, they're living in their car and they've got 8 things to do and their grandmother's in the back because they're caring for her. I mean, we've got to identify the need, simplify it, call them colors. That was the biggest, we now can talk in the healthcare world about there's the bronze, the silver, and the gold. And those are the categories of healthcare plans. And we've also found out that if you can attach a person who isn't living in their car to help them navigate their insurance pick or their daycare pick, they'll get a better outcome because they're truly going to understand what they're getting. But we've got to simplify this, and we've got to identify what exactly do we need when and build it. It's not, it's really hard if you're California. But if you're Oregon, this shouldn't be that hard. 3.9 million people, computers all over the place, smart people everywhere. Simplify, and identify the need, and we can get on it. The stories are great and moving, but we need the data to drive the solution.
I think it would also be helpful from the DHS side to understand how DHS, so one of the highest risk populations are kids in the child welfare system, and I believe disproportionately there's higher rates of teen pregnancy and just having children, single parenting. I don't know. I haven't looked at research recently, but they're both under DHS, and I'm wondering, how are we being strategic in aligning kids coming out of the welfare system who become moms and accessing the resources in this other arm of DHS. Because that's a very high-risk population overall, and they both sit under, it would be helpful to know how we can support and streamline some of those connections.
Are you wanting that at the next meeting, or is that something we could do more long-term?
I think I'm just thinking about the conversation and thinking.
Okay.
So do you have what you need on the rule? Have we given?
Sorry.
This was to get the council ready for what you're going to get and for you to inform the committee's process. And so there was no action for you to take.
Nice discussion.
And I think so. I've been writing all over my paper. I think, and I am really grateful that Clyde's here because some of these are not the council's decisions, but it's very hard to make one set of decisions in isolation from the other set. And so this was extremely valuable to have both of us thinking about it together. And the ERDC teams sits in and participates in every one of our meetings. So. Okay.
We have just one agenda item left, and it's the consent agenda. So I wanted to let folks know your lunch is here, but it seems like we ought to just get through the consent agenda and give you all many hours of your lives back and let you take your lunch and let you take your lunches to go. So is that
That's fine.
Chair Weber, is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we've seen this consent agenda before. It includes committee reports and recommendations for committee membership for Best Beginning and for Child Care and Education, as well as the Measuring Success Committee. And so, these groups need us to act for them to be able to keep going, and it's behind tab 3, it must be 3.
And this is exactly what was presented last time.
Yes, we have seen this. We've seen, there's nothing new. We've seen all this. Yeah, tab 3. So, I don't know, we're ready for a motion, or if people want to have some conversation before we have a motion, and then.
I would move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, so now we're open for discussion on these. Any questions?
On consent items, we don't discuss. We just
No
vote.
discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Vote. Let's take a vote on whether you're in favor. Say aye of accepting the consent agenda.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes. And I believe that we have the one piece left if we have anybody who has signed up for public testimony. We do. Oh, good. Dana, would you share with us?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name's Dana Hepper. I'm the Director of Policy and Program at the Children's Institute, and I just wanted to give a quick thanks to the Council for moving on the administrative rules today for Preschool Promise. As you guys know, we have a relatively new early learning division, a relatively new early learning council, hubs that have just graduated from being hublets, and now a new preschool program that all of these entities are working together to implement, so we can expect rockiness and challenges along the way. And what is also exciting is to see so much bravery for people to step forward and hold hands and give this thing a try. When we wrote that legislation in collaboration with Early Learning Division staff and the Oregon Head Start Association and the legislature, we really were trying to think ahead to the future, our vision for someday, knowing that it would take a heck of a lot of work to get us there. We are really sensitive to this need to employ the workforce that will absolutely best serve all of the children who will be in these preschool classrooms. And we can discuss and look at the bachelor's degree requirement. And I hope we also have a holistic conversation about supports for this preschool workforce, because whether or not they have a bachelor's degree, we want them to be excellent preschool teachers, assistants, bus drivers, the whole shebang. Because our kids need to have those excellent early learning experiences where they are loved, supported, respected, so they can really thrive. So thank you so much.
And we thank you for all the work that you and the Institute do. Thank you very much. It's critical for Oregon. Are there any closing items before we adjourn? and you get your lunch. Hey, it's the
For
meeting.
efficiency.
What?
Yeah.
Way to
I
go,
said thank you
Ms.
for
Weber.
efficiency.
The meeting is adjourned.